Chapter 6 Summary. Now that philosophy has laid the foundation of the true nature of knowledge, she can discuss God's nature, so we can see His knowledge. God is eternal, possessing perfect life forever, possessing all of time as His now. Therefore, God knows all things simultaneously, discerning between events that occur out of necessity and those that do not, so that we act freely, even while God knows perfectly what we will do in advance. No human being can evade God's all-encompassing foreknowledge, which never changes, and indeed which is logically prior to future events controlling them. But because God's knowledge does not force people to act, they still have true free will. God can justly reward and punish the righteous and the wicked, and we can pray effectively. We must then pursue virtue with reliance on God, living before Him. Chapter 6. Since then, as we just proved, everything known is understood not in accordance with its own nature, but in accordance with the nature of the faculty that comprehends it, let us now contemplate, as far as is lawful, the character of the divine essence, so that we can understand also the nature of its knowledge. God is eternal. In this judgment, all rational beings agree. Let us then consider the nature of eternity, for this word reveals something about both the divine nature and the divine knowledge. Eternity is the whole and perfect possession of endless life. This becomes clearer when we compare it with temporal things. For whatever lives in time exists in the present and moves from the past to the future. Nothing set in time can embrace the whole duration of its life at the same time. It does not yet grasp tomorrow, while it has already lost yesterday. No, even in the life of today, you live no longer than one brief transitory moment. Therefore, whatever is subject to the condition of time cannot rightly be thought eternal, even though, as Aristotle described the world, it has neither beginning nor end, and its life is stretched to the whole extent of infinity. For it does not include and embrace the whole space of infinite life simultaneously, but has no present hold on things to come, which have not yet happened. Accordingly, whatever includes and possesses the whole fullness of unending life at once, from which nothing future is absent, and from which nothing past has escaped, this is rightly called eternal. This must necessarily be always present to itself, fully possess itself, and hold the infinity of moving time in an abiding present. That means those who imagine that on Plato's principles the created world is co-eternal with the Creator are wrong, because they are told that he believed the world had no beginning in time and is destined never to end. For it is one thing for existence to be endlessly prolonged, which was what Plato ascribed to the world, and another for the whole of an endless life to be embraced in the present, which is clearly a property belonging only to the divine mind. Nor must God appear earlier than created things in mere duration of time. Rather, he is only prior in the unique simplicity of his nature. For the infinite progression of things in time copies this immediate existence in the present of the changeless life, and when it cannot exceed in equaling it, declines from changelessness into change, and falls away from the simplicity of the present to the infinite duration of the future and the past. And since it cannot possess the whole fullness of its life together, because in a way it never stops existing, it seems, up to a certain point, to copy the eternity it cannot complete and express by attaching itself to the present moment of time as it briefly and swiftly passes away. Since this somewhat resembles eternity's ever-abiding present, it bestows the appearance of existence on everything it touches. But since it cannot remain at rest, it hurries along the infinite path of time, and as a result continues by ceaseless movement the life whose completeness it could not embrace while it stood still. So, if we want to give things their right names, we will follow Plato in saying that God indeed is eternal, but the world perpetual. Since, then, every mode of judgment comprehends its objects according to its own nature, and since God remains forever in an eternal present, his knowledge, also transcending all movement of time, dwells in the simplicity of its own changeless present. Embracing the whole infinite sweep of the past and of the future, it contemplates all that falls within the simplicity of its understanding, as if it were now taking place. And therefore, if you will carefully consider that foresight by which it discerns all things, you will more rightly not call it foreknowledge of something future, but knowledge of a never-ending moment. So a better name to describe it is not foresight, but simply sight. For since it is utterly removed in its nature from low and trivial things, its sight embraces all things as from some lofty height. Why then do you insist that the things the divine eye surveys are involved in necessity, since clearly people impose no necessity on things they merely see? Does the act of vision add any necessity to the things your eyes see? Of course not. And yet, if we may appropriately compare God's present and mankind's, just as you see certain things in this temporary present of yours, so he sees all things in his eternal present. Therefore, this divine anticipation does not change the natures and properties of things. It beholds things present in front of it just as they will afterward happen in time. Nor does it confound things in its judgment, but in one glance of mind distinguishes both what will come necessarily and what without necessity. For when at the same time you see a person walking on the earth and the sun rising in the sky, you distinguish between the two, though one glance sees both, and you judge the former action to be voluntary and the latter necessary. So also, the divine vision in its universal range of view does not confuse the nature of the things that are present to its sight, even though they are future in respect of time. Thus it follows that when it perceives that something will come into existence, and yet is perfectly aware that this is unbound by any necessity, its perception is not opinion, but rather knowledge based on truth. And if you retort that what God sees is about to happen cannot fail to happen, and that what cannot fail to happen occurs of necessity, tying me down to this word necessity, I will acknowledge that you affirm a solid truth, but one that hardly anyone can approach to who has not made the divine his special study. For my answer would be that the same future event is necessary from the standpoint of divine knowledge, but when considered in its own nature, it seems absolutely free and unrestricted. So then, two types of necessity exist. One simple, such as people are necessarily mortal, and the other conditional, such as if you know that someone is walking, he must necessarily be walking. For what is known cannot be otherwise than as it is known to be, and yet this fact does not carry with it that other simple necessity, for that necessity is not imposed by the thing's own proper nature, but by an added condition. No necessity compels one who is voluntarily walking to go forward, although it is necessary for him to go forward while he is walking. In the same way, then, if Providence sees anything as present, it must necessarily exist, though it is bound by no necessity of its nature. Now, God views as present those coming events that happen of free will. These, accordingly, from the standpoint of the divine vision, are made necessary conditionally on God's knowledge. But when viewed in themselves, they do not lack the absolute freedom they naturally possess. Accordingly, without a doubt, all things that God foreknows are about to happen will happen, but some of these proceed from free will. And though they happen, yet by the fact of their existence they do not lose their proper nature, in virtue of which, before they happened, it was really possible that they might not have come to pass. What difference, then, does the denial of necessity make, since these things are conditional on divine knowledge, and so come to pass as if necessity compelled them? This difference, surely, which we saw in the case of the examples I just gave you, the sun rising and the person walking. At the moment of their occurrence, they must be taking place, and yet one of them, before it took place, was necessarily obliged to happen, while the other was not so at all. So, likewise, the things that are present to God, without doubt, exist, but some of them come from the necessity of things, others from the power of the agent performing them. Quite rightly, then, we have claimed that these things are necessary if viewed from the standpoint of the divine knowledge, but if they are considered in themselves, they are free from the chains of necessity, just like everything that sensation can grasp, regarded from the standpoint of reason, is universal, but viewed in its own nature, is particular. But, you will object, if I have power to change my purpose, I could nullify providence, since I could perhaps change something that comes within its foreknowledge. I answer that you could indeed adjust your purpose, but since the truth of providence is always present to see that you can do so, and whether you do, and how you change it, you cannot avoid divine foreknowledge. Just like you cannot escape the sight of a present spectator, even though by your free will you act one way and then another. So, you will reply, will God's knowledge change when I change, so that when I choose this or that, providence alters its knowledge correspondingly? That cannot be, for God's gaze anticipates all that is coming and makes it turn and come back to the presence of his own knowledge without varying in his foreknowledge, as you think, moving this way or that. In a single flash of mind, he anticipates and includes your changed decisions without altering. And God has received this ever-present comprehension and view of all things, not from the outcome of future events, but from the simplicity of his own nature. This also resolves the objection that offended you a little while ago, that our doings in the future were spoken of as if they supplied the cause of God's knowledge. For this capacity of knowledge, embracing all things in its immediate grasp, has itself fixed the bounds of all things, yet itself owes nothing to what happens after. Since this is so, the freedom of human will stands unshaken. Laws are not unrighteous, since their rewards and punishments are offered to wills unbound by any necessity. God, who foreknows all things, still looks down from above, and the ever-present eternity of his vision meets the future character of all our actions and rewards the good and punishes the bad. And we do not cast our hopes and prayers on God in vain, since they cannot fail to have power when rightly directed. Therefore, reject vice and cultivate virtue. Lift up your souls to righteous hopes and offer humble prayers to heaven. Great is the necessity laid upon you, if only you will not suppress it. A great necessity to live righteously, since you live before the eyes of a judge who sees all things.